Hey fam, welcome to the Free Trail Podcast and our new presenting sponsor. We're so happy to now be working with The Feed. Thefeed.com/free trail is where you need to go. It is the one-stop shop for all your training and racing nutrition needs. They have over 200 of the world's best nutrition brands stocked in one website. It's a fantastic resource. We've been big customers for a long time. We're really proud to work with them. Some of my favorite products that you can find at thefeed.com/free trail. Gnarly Nutrition Whey Protein Powder. I like the chocolate flavor. I have some of this after every one of my workouts and long runs. For in-run nutrition, Orange Drank. You'll see my big dumb face on it. Also from Gnarly Nutrition, enhanced sodium concentration here in the world's best fueling drink mix. Finally, HVMN, Ketone IQ. I have 2 of these ketone shots basically every single day, once before I go running and once in the middle of the afternoon when I need a little extra energy. Go to thefeed.com/free trail and you're gonna get an $80 credit, free money to spend at thefeed.com. It'll be $20 right away and then $20 every 90 days thereafter. You'll also get a sweet Trail Running Will Save the World water bottle. Again, that's thefeed.com/free trail. You'll get $80 credit to spend on your favorite nutrition products. And if you are international, they do ship internationally as well. So you can take care or at least take advantage of that great offering from The Feed. Big thanks to The Feed for supporting and thank you for watching the podcast. Amelia Boone, welcome to the Free Trail Podcast. Finally, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dylan. It's excited. I'm excited.
I've been a follower and admirer of yours for a long time. It was a recent newsletter that you sent that motivated me to finally invite you on the show, and I'm grateful that you would accept that invitation. I start all these podcasts in the same place. I prepared you for this. So to get things started, Amelia, obviously most people, I'm sure 100% of people know who you are, but what makes you you? What are your unique personality traits, strengths and weaknesses? How do they show up in your life?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing that probably people will not come as a shock to anybody, but I do think that the big thing that makes me me is really just my openness and vulnerability and willingness to talk about things that I think a lot of people shy away from talking about. But these are the conversations that I like having with my close friends and loved ones. And so I also tend to have them with a broader audience as well.
And I think that is one of the things that makes you you. And certainly as somebody who doesn't know you super well personally, something that I personally appreciate about you and that I'm sure a lot of your fans appreciate too. And it's the perfect segue because I wanted to start with writing in general. Like I was just telling you before we press record, I've been reading your blog for such a long time. I went back and looked, and the archive goes way back to 2011. So just to get things started, you've recently moved over to Substack, the modern platform.
Modern version, yeah.
But to get things started, I'd love to just hear you talk about writing in general, the process of it, and the relationship you've had with the written word over time.
Yeah. So I've been a writer my entire life. From the very early on, I started diaries probably when I was 6 or 7. And it's always been my main form of expression. Some people are visual, some people are audio. Mine has always been, I am so much better in the written word than the spoken word, which is kind of funny because I'm an attorney. So I feel like I should be good at the spoken word too. But, and it's always been my way to kind of make sense of things going on in my life or to try and process through things, to try and work through things. And so it's actually always really been maybe a selfish endeavor for me because that's how I have been able to understand and get to know myself. And then, when I started kind of putting things out into the world, I was like, oh, okay, I'm not alone in a lot of these thinkings, and I'm not alone in how my brain is working and things that I'm worried about or things that I'm dealing with and grappling. And I found a lot of connection through that as well.
So good. It makes me want to ask you, because I have this personal thesis, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, or if you identify with either of these two sort of prototype or prototypical individuals. I think every person fits in one of two buckets. You're either a podcast, Twitter, book person, or you're a Instagram, music, YouTube person. Which one are you?
I am definitely the former. Yes, I'm definitely the former.
Me too.
Instagram, maybe I was okay with Instagram before it became all video and reels.
Right.
So
when you could write a beautiful caption and actually have it be something that did employ the written word. But actually, this might be a fun thing to talk about too, because in just sort of getting ready for the chat today, I was just going back through your Instagram and social, and it feels like subjectively like you've taken a step back from those platforms, or you're just posting a little bit less frequently. Of course, you have these very large followings, so there is sort of the incentive to continue to feed that beast when you have that type of a following. But maybe just talk a little bit about how your relationship has changed with the short form platforms before we get to the long form written stuff.
Yeah, no, this has been on my mind a lot lately because it feels kind of gross for me to talk about this. It's like I have a large following, but I feel like I've kind of abandoned it in a way. And when there is an incentive to keep posting, because when you don't post for a while, then like your engagement goes down, people forget about you, you fall out of you fall out. And I've noticed that happens to me, and I'm like, okay, then now I have even less of an incentive to post because I hate seeing that like nobody is seeing my stuff anymore. So
really,
it's kind of terrible when I think about it. But and I honestly, my main thing is that I don't know if I haven't run out of things to say, but I don't always have a picture to go with it. And I don't want to keep like just posting selfies of me. And I don't have a lot of professional photos of myself anymore or anything like that. I used to have, 6-7 years ago when I had a bunch of sponsors and I was always having like professional photos done. And now it's just like, I don't know what to put out anymore. So it's not like I hate Instagram. I just don't know how to relate to it. And I think I start to get like I overanalyze it, and then I get too in my head, and it's dumb. I'm like, this should not be affecting my life, but it is.
It's true. I mean, the hurdle has gotten so much higher to post something up there. It's like, okay, I need like a team of videographers and video editors to even think about, publishing anything. But, on Substack, it's a lot easier. So
it is. Oh, and like Instagram stories, I find a lot more freedom. So I'm like, I still am very active there, but I just don't know what to put out in a main feed anymore, honestly, especially when I haven't been racing for the past year. So
this is such a perfect start, Amelia. It's making us seem very old and
I know
not able to interface with digital platforms in the 21st century.
I feel like this is a common feeling among a lot of my elder millennial friends, and that we are the first generation that kind of grew up. I got Facebook in, I think it was my junior year of college, because my college was one of the first ones to get it. And I've kind of had this for almost 2004. So 20 years with Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, X, whatever it's called now. And I think we may be reaching this burnout period where we don't know what to do with it anymore. And then it's like, okay, now you need to start a YouTube channel, and now you need to be on TikTok. And also but we're old now. We're old. So,
I don't have the energy for all these platforms, for God's
sakes. And then I'm like, I guess Martha Stewart's still doing it, so I don't have an excuse.
So good. Okay. So before we get to the Past My Prime Substack article that you wrote, I wanted to have you explain the sort of motto that you have, or the theme that you have for the year of 2024, that being the word maybe. I wanted to talk about this first because I think it's a good jumping off point before we get to the Past My Prime post.
Yeah. So the word maybe was actually inspired by, and I've been open about how I struggle with obsessive compulsive disorder, which really is this struggle to seek certainty in an uncertain world. And so the idea of taking a step back anytime I kind of start to spin around, oh my God, like, what am I doing with my life? Is this going to happen? Is this going to happen? It's like, you know what? Maybe you are never going to race again. Maybe you will never, do X, Y, and Z again, but maybe you will. And, or, maybe this is going to blow up your face. Maybe it's going to be great. And just trying to hold and embrace that uncertainty instead of trying to make it so I know my exact path, or I know exactly what's going to happen, which is what I've always used to, kind of gravitates towards.
It resonated with me because I am the same. I very much struggle with change and uncertainty. It causes me enormous stress. And one of the things that I try and focus on now is the word acceptance, which is basically the exact same thing of just being okay with maybe. And I feel like sport is almost the one place in life, even though it is inherently uncertain, but where you have a lot more control over outcomes. And maybe that's one of the reasons why both of us have devoted our life towards sport, is because we can at least in some way stumble towards certainty a little bit more successfully. Is that something that you find to be true in your own life?
I think so. I think that also sport gives us a structure, and especially when you're competing at the highest levels. And for me, those days of very high levels were mainly in my obstacle racing days. And so it was a very planned season, and it was a very planned kind of like, this is the series that you do, and you work up to the world championship at the end of the season. And it gave me a structure to my life. And I believe that also, as you know, in an ultra running, it's the same thing. You see a lot of there are the big races. People are working towards Western States or Hard Rock or UTMB. And like that aspect kind of gives us that, like that structure that we need. And the thing that I've found as I've kind of gone away from being in the utmost competitive part of the sport is, where is that structure? Oh, I don't have that structure anymore. Like, I'm not chasing golden tickets because there's no way in hell I can get a golden ticket anymore.
Me neither.
But like, right? Like, I need like 20 people to drop in front of me. And I start to say, okay, well, but I'm not done competing and I'm not done with sport, but it's not the same kind of feel and structure as it was 5-10 years ago for me.
See this, I knew this was going to be perfect. And structure in some way, instituting structure into our lives is maybe a futile attempt at, becoming closer with something adjacent to certainty, even though it doesn't exist in the universe. Anyway, coming to the Past My Prime newsletter that you sent out, that was the inspiration for us to set up this podcast. The essay starts with you describing an interaction that you had with your tax accountant. So for those who haven't read it, talk about that exchange and how it in some way inspired you to write the piece.
Yeah. So every year, I hate tax season along with everybody else. I send her all my stuff. And, for the past 10 years, I always send her all the 1099s from my sponsors and from the income that I get from them. And I told her, I'm like, going forward, there will probably be no more of these. I lost my last paying sponsor this year. And it's this reaction of hers like, oh, I'm so sorry, because she was used to me making a decent chunk of money from this sport. And in a way, I'm like, I was a little bit sad about it. It's an ego hit to me, but it's also very freeing in a way. Not only from the paperwork side of not having to keep track of all that, but now it's this time where I'm like, okay, sport is solely for me now. And which is scary, but it's also something that I'm instead trying to embrace, that I'm now I'm now a hobby jogger. Not said derivative, because I think we all are, but yeah.
Well, see, this is what I'd love to hear you say a little bit more about, because I think it's counterintuitive, because when athletes are quote unquote past their prime, one of the first symptoms of that reality is losing their sponsors. And that is often, I think, probably a really painful time for certain people. I actually had Anna Frost on the show a couple months ago, sometime this year, and she said that 2024 was the first season in 20 years where she didn't have any sponsors. And she voiced the same sentiment, and that she felt like it was really freeing. So, I mean, how is it the case that at the same time you're likely filing a tax return that is lower than it typically has been? In other words, your income is not as substantial, yet you're feeling a sense of freedom by, walking, or, not necessarily walking away, but being absolved of the responsibility of what that income demands.
Yeah, I think it's acute for me because of my tortured relationship with social media, and that I've all the thing that I hated about sponsorships were social media obligations and posting and feeling like I had to post a certain amount of times and be in a walking ad. And I cringed at it. I hated it. I always set up my contracts so that wasn't really a part of it, but that was always a sticking point. So there's a certain freedom that I'm like, well, I can post nothing for months and you don't care, which is what I do now. And also, I think, given my injury history, the feeling that I'm not disappointing anybody when I have to call somebody and say, I'm sorry, I'm injured. Like I can't run Barkley this year. I know I was prepping for it, but broke my heel. And it still sucks because I broke myself, but it only sucks for me, I guess. and not for any company. And, to their credit, all of my sponsors have been so supportive in the past around injury and around all of that. So I don't know if I ever truly felt pressure or if it was more of a self-imposed pressure. But it's kind of a weird thing to talk about too, because I never wanted to come out across as like, oh, woe is me. I've lost all my sponsors, like, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I mean, you describe in the piece something like, you're not getting just boxes of random things showing up at your door. And when I was 23, 25 years old, there was nothing cooler than just showing up at my house and a box being there and feeling like, oh my God, I've made it. This is my dream come true. Now, if a box of random shit shows up at my house, it like actually makes me angry. And it's just, I don't know.
Who gave out my address? Yeah. No.
Yeah. I don't know. there's so much from the piece that you wrote that I feel personally right now too. And the other thing that I can't really relate to that you write about is just like the inability to enjoy your prime. Because I mean, you were such a force of nature. I mean, you probably single-handedly changed OCR racing for the better, and they're probably still benefiting from your legacy in that sport. But again, you talk about your inability to really enjoy that special period of time in your life. I'd love to hear you say more about it as somebody who will never be a champion in anything myself.
I think you sell yourself short,
unless it's a podcasting Olympics. Then.
I mean, it does. It kind of makes me sad to look back, because I think the thing was when I was on the top of the sport, and I had to do a lot of therapy to work through this, but instead of enjoying it and being like, this is amazing, I was so scared of what happened when it would go away. And what would happen when I no longer was winning every single race? And would I fade into oblivion and lose all my sponsors and people would stop caring about me? Yes. No, it happens. No, I'm joking. And I just, it's one of those things that maybe, I don't know, maybe it is very hard to be at the top of your sport and still enjoying every single minute of it at the same time. Maybe that pressure and enjoyment don't really like go together that well, or maybe some people have it figured out. I mean, I don't know. Courtney looks like she's having a blast out there.
I don't get it.
So it could just be something with my personality. But I do think that I spent so much time fretting over what would happen if people would stop respecting me, if I was no longer on podiums or winning. And I'm on the other side of that now. And I can say, no, nobody lost respect for me. And people still love me, if not more than at that point. Because I think at that point, I also just wasn't super engaged with the community. And I was like scared of everybody. I didn't know how to be friends with competitors. Like it was an awkward time for me, for sure.
How do you perform it? I mean, because to me, it sounds like you weren't very happy in that time. And you've actually written a lot about happiness in general and how maybe it's a fool's errand to orient your life around pursuing happiness. But for me, again, it's hard to understand being the best in the world and being anything other than supremely happy. And now I look back at this with lens and I'm saying,
why did I not enjoy that more? And I think that I did. I think there were aspects of it that I did enjoy, but I don't think I was able to stay in the present. And, and I had a number of things going on in that period of my life. And honestly, at that point, I was starting to fall back into like disordered eating and eating disorder relapse. And then just that feeling of pressure from sponsors and the self-imposed pressure I put on myself. And I remember doing magazine shoots and just feeling like, okay, and now I got to like put my body on display for everybody to look at. And so I don't know. I think I made a way bigger deal of it at the time than now in hindsight. I probably should have, but it's kind of sad to say. But I think I remember somebody recommended to me that I read Andre Agassi's Open.
Dude, I'm reading it right now.
Right.
I'm reading it right now.
Oh my God. Best book ever.
Such a good book.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And not that I am Andre Agassi at all. Never achieved a modicum like that. But to understand how miserable he was playing tennis. And I was like, oh, okay, this isn't just like this is an experience that happens to people, So
wow. Yeah. Well, what the synchronicity there, because just last night I was reading the chapter where he's not far beyond winning his third Grand Slam title and then becoming just supremely depressed and actually turning to hardcore drug abuse at the time when he was theoretically at his peak powers. Yeah. How do you think about OCR now? Because one of the things that I was thinking about recently that's not necessarily totally relevant to your story, but maybe it is a conversation I had with Rob Krar years ago about him not really wanting to go back to Western states unless he was racing. And I made the comment to him, like, hey, if I had 2 Cougar trophies, I would show up in Olympic Valley every year holding those trophies and just walk around the village all week, just basking in the glory of my accomplishment. And he's the type of person where, he doesn't want that attention and it makes him cringe, right? And so very different people. How are you feeling about OCR at this point? Like, do you stay connected with that community or?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I go back every year to World's Toughest Mudder, which was like my big race, and I'm planning on racing it this year. And so, injuries have stymied me. I last ran it in 2021. So I will always connect back to that race. OCR has changed so much. And honestly, it's kind of dying right now. I don't know what the future of it holds. But I look now more on it with like a nostalgia and a thankfulness that I got to experience it at its height. And I just really lucked out on the timing. And I've made some wonderful friends there, connections, people that I text with every single day and that I see all the time. So I do have a really good relationship. I don't go to some of the Spartan Race Championships is like in Abu Dhabi now. And so I don't, frequent that anymore, but I do stay in touch. But I definitely feel way more free in ultra running. So I think for me, when I switched over to ultra running, I was like, oh, this is what fun is. Like, because that is where I found fun in sport again, So
the other thing that I wanted to ask you about is the fact that you have always kept a hyper successful career outside of the sport, which I have also, maybe without the hyper successful characterization, but you know what I mean? But I wondered if you'd done any introspection about this, because I have thought about it personally too, like whether that was some sort of internal hedge that I had to just protect myself against full commitment to a sport and what that would mean for myself and my identity, or maybe in some way not fully believing that I deserved that life. Does that resonate with you at all?
That does resonate with me. And I think that there was a time where I realized that based off my income from sport and sponsors, I could support myself on that. But as a very risk adverse person in general, I guess we'll take financially risk averse person in general. I couldn't walk away from the career. And I'm glad that I didn't because, I've had such an injury carousel and merry-go-round there. But I definitely think it was a hedge. And I'd like to say that I stuck with the attorney part of my life because I like using my brain in that way and I like doing all of that, which is true. But at the same time, I also think that it's like, okay, well, this is stable and I need this stability. And so I think that's more kind of what kept me in it. Do I think I could have been a better athlete or if I had gone all in? Frankly, I think I probably would have been more injured.
Yeah.
So in some ways, I think it kind of kept me a little bit more balanced.
In some way, it's maybe part of that whole attempt towards certainty story we just talked about.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Because I also realized too that if I was already struggling with my relationship with sport and it wasn't my main source of income, then if it all of a sudden I need to win this race to pay rent or to put food on the table, then that would really strain my relationship.
Torture. That would be torture.
Yeah.
You turned 40 recently, a milestone for any human, especially athletes. How did you celebrate that milestone? How is crossing that threshold played a part in this past my prime idea?
Yeah, I think that it was a time of introspection for me. I had broken my femur. So I was on crutches. I had just been through a big breakup. I was kind of in a way, just kind of, wow, okay, my life is a blank slate and I'm now turning 40, which I used to think was insanely old, but I don't feel that way. I don't feel old. I feel still very young. So I think that I started to kind of grapple with everything around that. Also, at the same time, very excited to be a master's runner for whatever that's worth. So trying to embrace that aspect of it.
Did you do anything symbolic though? Was there a major celebration to ring in this new decade?
I would say that the major I celebrated in the way that any elder millennial should celebrate, which is to go to a Death Cab for Cutie and Postal Service concert on my birthday. So thanks, Ben Gebhard, for playing in Denver on my birthday. So I feel like that was pretty symbolic of turning 40.
Yeah. Well, a belated happy birthday. I'm not far behind you and something I think about a lot. Actually, my brother turns 40 in January of next year. And he texted me just yesterday a link to an Airbnb in Oaxaca, Mexico. He said, hey, make sure you've got blocked the 15th through 19th of January next year. So we'll celebrate my brother's 40th and then the year after it'll be mine. I wanted to ask you about retirement. It's something that I struggle with, right? Like not necessarily quitting the sport, but like publicly admitting, like you sort of are with your newsletter, that things are different now. And, the way that I'm interfacing with sport is changing. Like, is there value in that? If for nothing else than to just align personal and public expectations, right? Like, is there value in some sort of formal retirement?
I've thought a lot about this because, we are in a participation sport, a sport that you can continue on in, hopefully in your 60s, 70s, 80s. I mean, until the day that you die, you could potentially be running races. Whereas, when Tom Brady retires, when Michael Jordan retires, that is it. There is a big official announcement and you are retired unless you come back in that sport or a different sport. But, and so it's kind of one of those things that it's not very necessary. You don't need to announce your retirement. But it's also, for me, was kind of this, I didn't think about it more in a way of tempering people's expectations. It was more of a way for me to perhaps adjust my own and the things that I think about when I think about sport. Because I think the thing, I wouldn't say in terms of retirement or in terms of changing your nature with it, is more just that you have to adjust your own expectations. But I don't want to be like, well, but I'm just out there to have fun, because I'm also still hyper competitive.
Yeah.
So I still want to go out there, and I still think that I may have my best days ahead of me, especially as a female ultra runner in her 40s. Like, you see women out there absolutely crushing it, but also just being more realistic about it. But I do think that for people who maybe, are out there, are winning, are at the top of their sport, then maybe if they're like taking a step back, then maybe they do want to temper people's expectations. But I don't think it's necessary. I think people get it. People get that we age. People get that you're not going to win for the rest of your life, unless you're Jeff Browning. I mean, I don't know, but
God damn it, Jeff.
I
For
know.
God's sakes, he's like 15 years older than me, and it feels like he's 15 years younger. It's insane.
It sucked. I like posted that on, I put up my last Instagram post, like as he was winning Cocodona, like, up until the very end. That was a crazy race. And everybody just kept being like, but Jeff Browning. And I was like, oh, damn it.
Yeah, of course. The anecdote to disprove the narrative. Say more about this, believing your best days are ahead. I think that's sort of counterintuitive, and I think it's one of the most powerful lines or paragraphs from your piece, where you're sort of redefining what best actually means.
Yeah. So I think for me, it's best doesn't actually have to mean like the best results. Best is in my relationship to the sport and how I feel and how excited I am to go out there and run and to compete, and seeing what I can do with different expectations. And so I really, really feel, and this transition for me started honestly probably a year or two ago, where I all of a sudden, instead of being terrified of races and terrified of, what would happen if I didn't do well at it, I just became excited. Like, I went into Cascade Crest last summer, just the most pumped I've ever been for a race, and like with zero kind of mixed feelings around it. And so that's what I'm hoping to kind of harness going forwards, is just that pure joy and, that kind of relationship with sport. So I'm excited for that. And I think that also is for a lot of people transitioning. And I got a lot of feedback on my Instagram post about that. And that's what people are saying. Like, it's this almost this freeing experience now, as people get in their 40s, 50s and beyond, to being like, okay, well, what can I do now for myself?
Yeah.
And what can I see for myself now? Which is, I think, super exciting.
So you just said you're hyper competitive. Pursuing sport, though, if you don't have like that explicit retirement message, the thing that I'm getting at is that I have a hard time now making myself suffer anymore. Like the idea of going to do 100-miler slow without crew and just making it a fun adventure sounds good to me. The idea of like trying to race for a top 10 at Western States and being on the rivet for 15 hours sounds horrific. Like, I have a hard time making myself hurt in the way that I used to, which means inherently, like, I feel a little less competitive. Like, I have a little less of that killer instinct.
I think you're right. Like, I'm the same way. And maybe I've never had that killer drive, maybe when it comes to ultras, and that I realized this when I ran Big's Backyard twice, is that I don't have the reckless self-disregard for my body to push myself to the point of what it takes to win one of those races. Like, I'm like, no, I'd like to be able to run again in like a month instead of like 6 months, though Harvey Lewis ran the next day. But hey, once again, just showing us all the unicorns out there. But I think I'm the same way. I'm drawn towards those races where I just want to be out there kind of in the woods doing my own thing. Western States for me sounds terrible with that idea of like the pit crew and everybody on and that pressure. So I guess I'm competitive in that when you put me into a race, I'm never going to give up on myself. Like, I'm still going to race to have a good race, but not at the expense of being absolutely miserable during the race.
Yeah. That whole Big's backyard phenomenon makes me a little nervous. Like, I do feel that it's inevitable somebody's going to run themselves to death at one of those events. It's now getting just completely out of hand.
Exactly.
Oh, God. So another thing, I mean, your posts always have like a lot of thought behind them and therefore have a ton of impact. And again, I reread the Past My Prime essay today, and I was just like reading through some of the comments too, which are also incredibly thoughtful. And I had one here that I wanted to just bring up and have you respond to, because I think it's certainly something that I feel is resonant. And it's from Jessica McCoy, who I don't know personally, but what she says is, maybe life is a series of peaks. And once you've had your peak performance as an athlete, the next peak is teaching or an advocacy or some other thing. We contain multitudes. And I love that sentiment so much. And it's sort of what I feel right now as I am in this moment of transition too, of like the next thing, even if it may not have anything to do with performing on the trails or whatever as an athlete, can be equally consuming, equally satisfying, equally enlivening. So what are the multitudes for you?
Right. No, and I love that. I remember that comment from Jessica, and I agree. And I think that, you know, like, and you've done that in terms of building this, you know, empire around free trail and building the community. And so I think that that's key. Some people do it through coaching. You know, you see so many people going into coaching. For me, I guess it's been more kind of an informal mentoring type of role. And I spend a lot of time talking to, you know, many runners, especially women, around eating disorders in sport, around things like bone density, you know, talking to the younger generation that are dealing with things that I went through within my 20s. And so I do really I like that role. It hasn't been anything like formalized or anything like that, but I do, for me, really enjoy that. And frankly, the biggest thing that I love is crewing and supporting and pacing and being out in the community. If I could just crew and pace for the rest of my life, I would be so happy. Like, it's like my favorite thing to watch somebody else suffer and for me to just like help them suffer along. That could be a weird sound clip, but no, it's my favorite thing to watch somebody else suffer. Yes. But just really having the time to be present there in the community and to be able to give back in however I can, you know.
So, but what is the multitudes? I mean, because I don't know, like, yeah, volunteering, crewing and pacing, it's a fun thing to do, but is that like something you orient your entire life around, like you do a life as an athlete, you know?
I mean, probably not. I mean, the multitudes for me, I feel like I've always contained multitudes. I'm like, I got the attorney realm. I'm like, I'm talking about mental health. I'm talking about running. But I don't know. I don't know if there's like a next frontier for me, if there's like a different sport that I want to explore. I mean, I'm open to anything and everything. I like kind of dabbling. So we'll see. I'm still trying to figure it out.
I think there is a next frontier for you, even if it's not obvious right now. So
I definitely think so, you know.
In the vein of your story having impact on people, you know, we're coming up on the 5-year anniversary of you writing the thing that you said was the most important thing you've ever written, that started an amazing public dialogue. We started our conversation by you saying that you are incredibly open, for better or for worse. And it's for the better for many, many people. Can you share the impact that sharing that story of you publicly confronting your eating disorder on your blog, like what impact did that have on you? How do you think about it now with 5 years of perspective?
Yeah. I mean, 5 years ago, I was in treatment at this time at Opal in Seattle. So it's that kind of one of those anniversaries that you look back on, you're like, honestly, it's the best decision I've ever made in my life to, one, go back into treatment, and two, to talk about it. I think that there were people who were speaking about eating disorder in sport before me that kind of started to encourage me to take steps towards that. And then I've seen over these past 5 years just how robust that conversation has become. And like what a recognition is. Like, it's no longer sad to say that it's no longer strange for people to talk about it, because like I hate that this many people have gone through this. But I also think it's such an important conversation that we're now seeing changes within the culture of the sport, within coaching, within how we talk about our bodies, how we fuel our bodies. And so I just, not a day goes by that I don't talk to somebody that about some aspect of this and about my story and about their stories. And so that is like the biggest way that I feel like I have connected. And I hate to be like, use me as something that you don't want to be, or like, it's like the warning case. But, if others can take steps to correct, before, it got to a place where I was, then, I'm here, I'm all for it.
It must feel good though, that a couple decades of suffering has a positive impact in the world. Like there was some purpose behind it. Like if there's anything you can share about the impact it's had more broadly, I'm sure it's led to incredible conversations with other people whose lives have been impacted similarly. I recall the episode that you did with Rich Roll, which I'm sure also reached hundreds of thousands of people without revealing anything that's private or whatever. Is there any moments that stick out where you think like, wow, this has actually done some good in the world, or sharing this has been really important?
Yeah, in a number of ways, I've had actually many parents reach out to me and talk about their kids. And actually, I remember one father who reached out to me who said that his daughter, in her way of telling her dad that she needed help, was by sending him my piece and saying, "Dad, this is me. Like, and I don't know how to voice this, but like, I need help."
Wow.
And that was very, very impactful for me to know that. And I know several athletes who have gone back into treatment, quote unquote, later in life, in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and who have come out the other side and who are doing phenomenal now. And so there are things like that all over. So that has been extremely meaningful for me. It's weird to talk about. I feel I'm like, I don't like toot my own horn, and I don't like talking about, because I'm never one of those people that's like, I set out to inspire and things like that. It's more like I'm trying to figure my own shit out. But in me figuring my own shit out, if that helps other people figure theirs out, then I adore that.
I think it's something to be very proud of. You could have easily just held that inside forever, and there would probably be thousands of people who would not have felt seen or been inspired to take similar action that you did in your own life. And maybe this is part of your multitudes, right? Like
I think so. It's funny. I was actually thinking about, I think when we were at the first Tiger Claw ever, you were coming off of you broke your fibula.
Oh yeah. I think I was on crutches still maybe at that time.
Yeah. Or like you had just started, but anyway, but I was there in Seattle because I was in treatment, but nobody knew that. Like I just came to Tiger Claw to like watch, but it was because I was there at treatment. And I just remember at that point, I remember seeing you, I remember seeing Ethan and everybody, but like in my, like holding in this secret, but being like, okay, like starting to think about what would it look like if I did actually talk about this, so.
That was exactly 5 years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So back to this multitudes thing now, because another thing that you talk about or you write about a lot is like purpose. And I think that's something that every human wrestles with, especially as we age, is like finding our purpose. What are we doing with our lives and why? How do you think about that fundamental life question now as a 40-year-old mature person?
Yeah, as a mature person. Well, and then this has also been especially acute for me going through grappling. And another thing I've been very public about is about having children. And would I have children? Do I want to have kids? Like, what happens if I don't? And, I'm a 40-year-old single woman, and I did freeze my eggs a few years ago, but like, it's not, I've come to the realization that my own biological children are not in the future for me. And I think a lot of people at my age find meaning and purpose in raising a future generation, which is amazing. And I am so in awe of you and everybody who is able to do that, because I'm like, I don't know how parents do it.
Yep.
But I think it is also just kind of like, okay, that's a course. Like, that is your purpose. Keep this tiny human alive, raise them into what? And now I'm realizing I have all of this energy to give because I have not chosen that path. And where can I funnel that? Like, where can I find meaning and purpose that isn't in that traditional way? And I am still trying to figure that out. I started a group of childless and child-free women here in like the greater Denver area. And we're kind of figuring out, okay, like, how can we make an impact, like, with our time and our effort? And, we're looking into ways where they're like, are there elders that don't have kids? Like, can we adopt grandparents or not grandparents, but like adopt elderly people who may not have kids, that we can then help them, just kind of thinking of multi-generational living and giving back. And so that's another avenue that I've been really exploring for sure.
It's another thing that you wrote about too, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep. Yeah.
This is a really interesting insight, because I have never put that together of like, at a certain point, a lot of people, their purpose does become their children. I think that's almost the case for my wife, Harmony, and I. We were sort of ambivalent about having kids until our mid-30s. And then we decided that we wanted to, for no real good reason, I don't think, other than maybe it gives us a little bit of purpose. And I think, again, just like every human is looking for, what are we doing with our lives and why? And for a lot of people, it does become children, but that doesn't necessarily need to be the only thing when you enter the age bracket that you and I are in, but that it does need to be some purpose. Otherwise, I think we do become unanchored. And I think that's a really cool thing that you're working.
And I think for a lot of people, their purpose is their career. And, as that's never been my, climbing the corporate ladder has never really been my thing. And for other people, and for me, I found a lot of purpose in sport, and I found forever that purpose in sport, being at the top of the sport. And now I'm like, okay, well, that's no longer my purpose in sport. So where does that fit in, and where are these holes, and how do I do that? And how do I move through that over these next 20 years? And I don't have any answers, but I don't think anybody, and I don't trust people that have answers. So I'm glad that I don't have answers.
Yeah. I certainly couldn't tell you what my purpose is right now, but this career thing is interesting too. Maybe it'd be a good time to just talk about that and how that's evolved, because there's always that practical tension between how I make my money and what do I feel my purpose is, and bringing those two things closer together is usually where we find personal satisfaction in life. I've always known you to be an attorney for Apple. Right. Tell me about your professional life. How has that evolved in recent years? You're not climbing the corporate ladder. You're not Tim Cook's second in command at this point.
I'm sad and or happy to say no, because I imagine that's a very stressful job. But no, I think had I really wanted to go full in on the career route, I would have stayed at a law firm. I would have made partner. They make a few $1 million a year. You bust your ass nonstop, and just, I don't know. I always thought that was growing up. I always thought that was going to end up being my life. And then I realized that I want to be way more balanced in that. So I enjoy my career. I enjoy my work. I work hard, but I also like to have things outside of it, and I like to be able to go out and go to races and and be with people and have that balance. And I think it's tricky because I think everybody has a different a different relationship with their career. And there's no one right answer to that, I suppose. But there's this part of me that's like, okay, wait, all of my law school friends are now partners at law firms, and that's like not me. And did I fall behind in that realm? It's not like that high achiever aspect, but just kind of letting that go and being like, this is what I chose. And I kind of enjoy this path that I've taken,
What about Colorado? After bouncing around a bit, Harmony and I are back in California. You were living here at one period of time. You're probably about 4 or 5 years since you moved to Colorado?
4 years. Yeah.
Does it feel like long-term home base to you?
It does. I loved the Bay Area, the trails. I mean, every time I was just in California week, it's too good. And if I could have stayed in Marin, if I could have lived in Marin when I was there, I probably would have never left. But the commute down to Apple from Marin would have been a bear.
Yeah.
So, Colorado, I adore because I've really found my community of people. Mm-hmm. And the vast majority of those have been runners, but I've started to branch out a lot, which has been great too, to have people, like, no offense to runners, but beyond that, different views on life, different priorities.
I didn't know those people existed, but yeah.
Well, typically in Colorado, they're like climbers or cyclists. They're still athletes.
Vaguely familiar.
Exactly. They understand. They get it. So no, it does feel like home. I think if anything, the only move I would ever make would probably be back to the Pacific Northwest at some point, just since those are my roots. But no plans.
Cool. I'm becoming cognizant now that we've been talking as if we're both hanging our shoes up and never running again. So as we begin to make our way towards the end, I'd love to hear where you are with your running right now. What are you excited about? How are you feeling physically, mentally? How's your interaction with the sport?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a long road back from crutches. I started running again in early December, finally back up to kind of like full volume for me, which is going to be lower it's like 4 to 5 days a week is going to be my thing, for the rest of my life. Probably, well, the max, I would say. I don't know if I'm going to be doing that when I'm 70, but, so feeling good. I am running High Lonesome, signed up to run High Lonesome this July. I have all intents of running it. We'll see if my body cooperates to get to that start lane, as always. But no, I mean, it's not like I'm walking away. I'm still out there. I'm still that person that's like, I got to get my bucket list things in. I want to explore fun races. I want to see fun things and just experience that, and I think that's what's so cool about our sport is that you can continue doing that for as long as you want to, and as long as your body cooperates.
At the risk of asking you a question you've probably been asked a billion times, I think you posted about this recently too, of something like, why continue to go back to 100-milers after you've had this repeated cycle of serious bone-related injury? Have you found an answer to that question?
Because it's the distance that kind of lights my soul on fire. I mean, there is something about running through the night and about it's just where I feel the most alive. And it's shorter things are fine. And 100K is a nice thing. You get to go sleep in a bed at night. It's great. But I just love the whole journey that you go through with 100-miler and the ups and the downs and the memories. And this is probably why at some point I'll run like freaking Cocodona, because I am that person that just wants to go longer.
Me too.
But my body doesn't want me to go longer. So now I have to figure, I really want to do Tour de France at some point. So it's just how I'm wired, I think, and I wouldn't get the same if somebody was like, yeah, you can run, but you can only run 10Ks for the rest of your life. I think I'd be like, I'll pick up cycling. It's just, it doesn't appeal to me as much.
It's so funny. Cocodona, I've had the exact same feeling. I've never really been interested in 200-mile races. And then the whole drama that unfolded this year, the coverage of it, all the testimonials that I've heard from people who are there in attendance. I've said to Harmony and other people close to me, just don't let me sign up for this race. And somebody sent me a link that it's already sold out for next year. I was like, oh, thank God. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's not going to be next year.
Oh, don't worry. I'm sure they would let you in, Dylan, if you wanted to.
Well, I mean, the thing that's great is, and that I want to get across here to make sure it's obvious is, I mean, the essay was so good that you wrote, and I think a lot of people can relate to it, but you can feel that you still have a lot of enthusiasm for it, even though it's titled Past My Prime, you know?
Yeah.
When I opened the email, I was wondering, you know, how
is she hanging everything up?
Well, yeah, but there's like a definitive aura of positivity in the newsletter. So, yeah, I don't know. I do you still feel like, are you pulled to the absurd events like, you know, the Barclays and the Bigs? It sounds like Bigs, maybe not. But any comments on the historic 2024 Barclay? Because that did bring you out of your social media retirement. You were very active.
It did. You know, it's funny because you know, Laz has given me the opportunity to run Barclay a few times since I ran in 2018, and I've been too injured every time. So at some point, I feel like I maybe hopefully get another shot. And I don't expect great things from myself, but I'm also like, man, if I get in next year, it's going to be the worst course ever because so many people finished. But no, you know, I think I am still drawn to that kind of thing. And I am just still drawn to all the weird and absurd. And I am more excited now than ever for the sport. And I know every runner has a different relationship with it. And I feel like some, as soon as they, you know, stop winning, are like, well, hang it up and walk away. And that's fine. That is a totally valid option. And then other people are like, no, I'm going to keep doing my thing and just, and that's also like, there's no right or wrong. Mm-hmm. So I feel like people just kind of have to figure out like what feels right for them. And me, I'm like, I am going down with the sinking ship, you know, so I will be out there.
Yes. They'll have to stretch for me off the trails.
They'll be like, someday. Wait, so you want to crutch this 100 miler?
What is it that you want to do? They'll have to stretch my carcass off the trails, and then they're going to have to bring my ashes back out there and spread. Oh wait,
that's actually where. So here's a morbid question: if you had to spread your ashes on the course of one race, what would it be?
Probably Hard Rock.
Hard Rock, yeah.
If not Western States, maybe half and half. You know, got to pay respect to both races. Amelia, as we begin to wind down, is there anything else that you're particularly excited about? Any other new pieces that you're thinking about in your head? I mean, I don't know, this whole, I would challenge you to think about the multitudes, because I don't know. I just feel that you have a gift with writing. You're so good at sharing. You've got an incredible story. You've achieved so much. What else is exciting you right now?
Oh, thank you. You know, that's a good question. And I think there's a lot of things kind of kicking around in my mind. None of them are very fully formed yet at this point. I always keep a list. So I will build the suspense. People are just going to have to subscribe to my Substack
the newsletter
to figure out what those are going to be.
Oh, perfect. I'll make sure to include a link in the show notes of today's episode. Definitely a must read every time it hits your inbox.
Thank you.
Amelia, I end these conversations with the same question for everybody. That is just, who is one person that you admire? Can be inside or outside of sport, living or dead. Why do you admire that person?
Well, I'm going to continue with our theme of this podcast and say that inside of sport, the person that I admire is Pam Reed, because they're like talking about longevity and kicking ass in this sport. Like, I remember seeing her at Run Rabbit the year that I was running, and I went by her and I had to stop and introduce myself because she's like my hero. And she was so confused about why I was telling her all these things about why she's my hero. And this is why I'm never retiring. Like, that is my goal, is that I would love to be out there in my 60s doing these insane races, kicking ass. And, I'm just trying to set myself up for that. So Pam, she has no idea who I am, but
a very worthy selection here. I'm just pulling up her ultra sign up, which has 242 races on it.
Was it last year she did Western States, Badwater, Hard Rock?
Yes. Western States, Badwater, Hard Rock, all in the stretch of 3 weeks. I saw her in the golden hour on the Western States course. I ran backwards on the course as she was putting the finishing touches on it. And she was just getting warmed up for Badwater 2 weeks later. And then Hard Rock, I think a week after that. Just an
absolutely
icon.
Insane.
63.
I know. Absolutely insane. I hope everybody, especially the young people getting in this sport, like read up on their icons of the sport, because I feel like there's so much history and goodness and things that I wish I could talk ultra running history like all day long. Yeah. This is like my favorite thing.
We'll save that for round 2.
Part 2. Yeah.
Well, Amelia, good luck in your preparation for High Lonesome. It's coming up very quickly. I appreciate you coming on the podcast and keep publishing that newsletter.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Dylan.